Blackouts, those abrupt, chilling moments when the lights vanish, can transform familiar spaces into realms of fear. While most of us experience blackouts as mere inconveniences, some encounter things far more sinister. Here are 3 equally haunting tales of true events during blackouts, each a testament to the horrors lurking in the dark. It was a scorching summer night in New York City. Sarah, a 26-year-old journalist, was wrapping up her work in her dimly lit apartment. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness, the power outage catching her off guard. She cursed softly and fumbled for her phone to use as a flashlight. Her building often experienced blackouts, but this one felt different, unnaturally quiet. The faint glow of distant streetlights outside was her only source of comfort. Deciding to check on her neighbors, Sarah grabbed her keys and ventured into the hallway. The corridor was eerily silent, the usual sounds of life completely absent. Her phone's flashlight barely pierced the oppressive darkness. As she descended the stairs, she heard faint footsteps echoing below her. "Hello?" she called, her voice quivering with uncertainty. No response came, only the rhythmic sound of someone moving below. She hesitated but forced herself to continue, convincing herself it was a neighbor. The footsteps grew louder, now echoing unnervingly close. She swung her flashlight around but saw nothing, only the empty stairwell. Then, her beam caught something, a shadow moving just out of reach. Her heart raced as she froze in place, listening intently. A sudden knock on the stairwell railing startled her, followed by a chilling whisper. "Why did you come down?" the voice rasped, sending shivers through her spine. Sarah bolted back to her apartment, slamming the door shut and locking it. Pressing her ear against the door, she heard slow, deliberate footsteps outside. The steps stopped at her door, followed by 3 soft knocks. "Let me in," the voice whispered again, its tone almost pleading. She backed away, clutching her phone as a weapon, tears streaming down her face. Minutes later, the power returned, and the noises stopped. Summoning her courage, she opened the door. The hallway was empty, save for a muddy handprint smeared on the wall near her door. That night, Sarah slept with all the lights on. She later learned that a man who once lived in the building had disappeared during a blackout years ago, in that very stairwell. Dr. Eric Morgan had worked at Ridgefield Asylum for 12 years. The asylum, built in the early 1900s, was notorious for its unreliable power grid. One stormy night, the entire facility was plunged into darkness during a blackout. Eric grabbed his flashlight and began his rounds, ensuring the patients were safe. The dim corridors echoed with muffled murmurs and the occasional sound of shuffling feet. But one wing was completely silent, the abandoned East Wing. The East Wing had been shut down years ago after a mysterious incident. Its last resident, Margot, a patient with severe delusions, had vanished during a blackout. Her disappearance remained unsolved, but rumors among the staff hinted at something darker. Eric's rounds led him near the East Wing that night, and he felt an inexplicable chill. The door to the wing, which was supposed to be locked, stood slightly ajar. Summoning his courage, he stepped inside, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing down the decayed corridor. A faint sobbing sound responded, sending a wave of unease through him. The sound seemed to come from Margot's old room at the end of the hall. He approached cautiously, the sobbing growing louder with each step. When he reached the room, he found it empty, save for an old bed frame. Suddenly, his flashlight flickered, and the sobbing stopped abruptly. The air grew icy, and the hairs on Eric's neck stood on end. Then, a whisper came from behind him, "Why didn't you help me?" He spun around, but there was nothing there, just empty darkness. His flashlight finally stabilized, illuminating claw marks etched into the walls. Terrified, Eric ran back to the main wing, his heart pounding in his chest. When the power returned, he convinced the staff to check the East Wing with him. But the claw marks were gone, and the door to Margot's room was locked. To this day, Eric refuses to speak of what he heard that night. The staff, however, often report hearing faint sobbing during storms. Lila and her 6-year-old son, Ethan, were visiting her grandmother's farmhouse. The rural property, surrounded by dense woods, was beautiful but isolated. One stormy evening, a blackout engulfed the house, plunging it into darkness. Ethan, afraid of the dark, clung to Lila as she lit candles around the house. "Mommy, someone's outside," he whispered, pointing toward the living room window. Lila peered out but saw only the swaying trees and pouring rain. "It's just the storm," she reassured him, though she felt uneasy herself. After settling Ethan in bed, Lila decided to check the circuit breaker. She grabbed a flashlight and descended into the basement, the old wooden stairs creaking under her weight. The air in the basement was damp, and cobwebs clung to the ceiling. She found the breaker box and flipped the switches, but the power didn't return. Then she heard Ethan's laughter echoing from upstairs. Relieved, she called out, "Ethan, stay in bed." But his laughter sounded odd, too deep, too distorted. Rushing upstairs, she found his bed empty. Panic set in as she searched the house, calling his name. The laughter grew louder, now coming from outside. Grabbing a lantern, Lila stepped onto the porch, the storm now eerily calm. In the distance, she saw Ethan standing near the barn, waving at her. She ran toward him, but as she approached, her lantern flickered. Ethan's face looked wrong, his smile too wide, his eyes too dark. "Come play with us, Mommy," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. Behind him, shadowy figures emerged, their faces featureless and their hands reaching out. Lila screamed and bolted back to the house, locking the doors behind her. When the power returned, she found Ethan sound asleep in his bed. To this day, she avoids the farmhouse, convinced something in the blackout tried to take her son. In the void of a blackout, the familiar becomes unrecognizable, and the unseen comes to life. These true stories remind us that darkness doesn't just conceal, it reveals. Always keep a light close, and be prepared for what may emerge when it fades.